The 4th Gen Camaro debuted in 1993 with a radical new styling. Now this styling came from a concept car that they had done earlier in the late 1980s. It was completely new. I mean, there was nothing like it in the road back then. But with the 4th Gen specifically, the road car actually looked very similar to the concept car that was originally designed. And this was peak American design, because at this time, people weren't thinking about doing nostalgic cars. They were looking forward instead of backwards. And it showed everywhere in this car. And today, it's kind of even cooler than before. But the real reason to get a 4th Gen Camaro is what's under the hood. It is pure testosterone on wheels.
8 cilindros para los machos, para los hombres, como debe de ser.
The legendary LT1 directly from the Corvette was planted into this Camaro. There wasn't a 305 motor. So when you got the Z28 in the 1983 Camaro, they were in different V8 versions. You just got the vet engine in that car. An amazing engine. And later, the LS1, an even more amazing engine. So even though these cars handle amazing and they're really fun, the real reason that you get a 4th Gen Camaro is for the engine. But first, don't forget to subscribe so that this video gets pushed out to more people all around the world and everybody can know what's up with the 4th Gen F-bodies. So let's talk a little bit about the LT1 and how amazing this car is. It does have one massive drawback that I actually know a couple people that have sold their cars just because of this one problem. However, it's not a big deal, but I'll get back to that in just a second. There is like a myth in the automotive world that to go really fast, you can't do that with the LT motors and you have to go straight to the LS motors. Nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, if you look at the numbers, the LT4 engine Camaro SS, that car was actually faster than all the subsequent LS cars.
Officially, what you're seeing is Goodyear's best effort to contain 330 horsepower, but we think there's more here than 330. It may be more like 350. The LT4 rips off 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds and completes the quarter mile in 13.2 at 109 miles per hour. That's a tick faster in the quarter than the new C5 Corvette with the LS1. Trust me, this is the hot one.
And it was quiet, it was smooth. Like if you wouldn't know what was done to that car, you would think it's just a factory engine. So looking at the LT4, which is just basically a massaged LT1, it gives you a clue onto how fast these cars can truly be with just a handful of bolt-ons. Remember that the LT4 was consistently running low 13s with quiet exhaust and the camshaft that was very docile. Can you imagine what you could do to this LT1 engine? Now, the biggest problem is obviously the Optispark. This ignition system in itself is not a big deal. I mean, it's just a simple ignition system. However, water and condensation gets trapped in there and it makes your life a living headache because it doesn't necessarily need to rain for you to get built up condensation in this unit. For example, here in Miami, the humidity will knock out your Optispark, especially overnight. When you wake up in the morning, the car is completely wet. It hasn't rained, it's just the morning dew, and your engine will be completely wet. You try to start it on and you have issues. Now, I know that in 1995, they changed it to a vented unit, and that vented unit, which works with the vacuum line, completely cures this problem. However, you do run into problems when the vacuum line that provides vacuum to the Optispark cracks, and then you have a dead Optispark. So the most important thing in this entire car is make sure that you have a quality Optispark unit. Do not go for cheap replacement units because you're gonna pay for it in headaches and hours trying to take this thing apart, seeing what's wrong with it, and it's just a cheap unit. Go for quality components that when you do the Optispark should actually last over 100,000 miles if you go with a quality unit. The earlier ones can also be converted to the new vented design. Now in 1998, the LS cars came in with a revised styling, but as far as the styling, nobody really cares about the styling. You know, we're all gearheads here, and so what we care about is the mechanicals, what's under the hood. The LS is so good that it's the #1 swapped engine in the entire world. Everybody wants to get a piece of that LS in their car. However, the simplest way to get an LS is just to buy an LS Camaro because swapping it always costs more. This LS engine is not just a standard LS engine that came in the truck motors. This is the LS1, and this is unique to the Corvette and the Camaro, and of course the Firebirds. This is the sole reason that many people buy this car, for the LS.
Chevy, on the other hand, is clearly underrating the LS1 small block, quoting 305 horses at the flywheel. But with 286 ponies at the rear axle, the real rating is more like 330. Close to the Corvette's 300 345 horses. Needless to say, the Mustang is outclassed.
The engine feels like it has an extra 20 cubic inches versus the older LT1 motors. But most importantly, to keep these cars on the road, the LS motors are actually simpler because they don't have the Optispark. They're also smoother and quieter. Not really quieter. The mufflers did get a lot bigger in 1998, so it gives the perception of a quieter engine because they were trying to go for smoothness and sophistication, but everybody knows what these cars are for. It is for power, and that's what those cars have. So when you're looking at these cars, the prices are all over the place, but besides that, what looks like a deal today might look very different in 10 years. And let me tell you why. The third gen Camaros, which is obviously the F-bodies before this car, the prices were nothing. These cars weren't worth nothing for so many years. And look at the prices now. Even the base 305 IROCs in nice condition are selling for more than 1993 Mustang Cobras, because there's a lot of nice 1993 Mustang Cobras, but there are very few nice third gen IROC Z28. So what happens with this? You'll have these cars exchanging hands for $80,000, $100,000. And these are not asking prices. These are sold prices. This wasn't the case 5 years ago. And let me remind you that this is happening while other cars values are going down. The third gen Camaros values are going up. So this is not like a bump. No, the third gen Camaros are exploding, and a big factor is that there's not many of those cars on the road. Well, guess what? They made far less 4th gen Camaros than they did 3rd gen Camaros. There were less of these 4th gen Camaros made than Mustangs. The fact that this car ended in 2002, what initially might seem like a really bad thing, what it has actually done is that the cars that are in really nice condition are selling at a huge premium versus their competition. And so this becomes a really interesting car if you want to just buy and hold for a couple years. You'll buy it, drive it around for free, and then sell it for the same or much more. Now, you don't buy a Camaro just to keep it stock, even though a lot of people do. You buy this car to modify it and make it your own, and up the already testosterone level that this car has from 10 to 100. Now, this car came with the very same engine that came in the Corvette, and I'm talking about the LT1 and the LS motors. Now, if you look at the power figures, the Corvette was making more horsepower than the F-bodies. Why is that? Intake and exhaust, and I would say mainly exhaust, because even in 1998, the muffler was increased over 20% on the LS cars. This means actually more restriction. So a full catback exhaust will completely unleash the beast that's already in there, giving you the power that was choked in the Camaro's packaging. It's totally worth it, and it makes the car just sound so good. For the 1993 through 1997 LT1 cars, these cars came with the iron drive shaft. The later LS motors came factory with an aluminum drive shaft. What does this mean? That the earlier cars are more prone to vibrations and things that don't feel good just because the drive shaft is not balanced like they are on the newer ones. So before going crazy with turbos or in a whole bunch of different things, upgrading the drive shaft makes a massive difference. Car is gonna rev a lot smoother and faster because it's a rotating mass, and you're gonna feel it driving around the block. Few things make a real world difference like an aluminum drive shaft. Now they are pricey, but it's worth it. The LS cars came with this drive shaft from the factory, and of course is baked into the price. For the automatics, this is one of the mods that have always been done to these cars because they predominantly came with automatics in the 3rd generations and the 4th generations, and it is a higher stall torque converter. This helps you launch hard, really hard. As a matter of fact, most of the burnouts that you see are people that have higher stall torque converters, and they just touch the throttle and it just launches. Now, back in the olden days in 1990s, the torque converters were relatively inexpensive, like $200, and if you didn't even have the $200, I knew people that would cut it open, bend the fins inside, and weld it back up just to get that crazy launch. But the prices have gone up, and they might seem expensive if you don't really understand what this does. When you step on the gas, it'll hold the RPM and release the rear wheels when it gets to a higher RPM, so you launch way harder, almost like a manual car. It barely affects drivability, especially on the highway, because it's still a lockup torque converter, but your ability to launch is completely dramatically changed, and this is what a higher stall torque converter does. Quick tip: when you're looking up torque converters, don't necessarily look at the actual inches, look at the spec on the stall speed. That's what you're looking for. Just because you see one that's 9-inch and one that's 10-inch, the 10-inch might actually have a higher stall speed than the 9-inch one. So it's not apples to apples comparison. Always look at the stall speed instead of the actual size. I will do this before gears. It's a long tradition with the F-bodies, and it's a good one. On to the next one. Next up is a camshaft. Now you have to be so careful with camshaft because the bigger camshaft doesn't necessarily mean better. Remember, a bigger camshaft will shift the power up in the rev range where you're shifting, but you are gonna also lose power in the low end, which is fine if you're revving really fast through the rev range. However, as far as drivability, it gets very iffy. Now, on a manual car, you have a lot more control over the rev range. On the automatics, you don't. So you have to be extra careful with the size of the cam that you put on your Camaro, because if you put a crazy camshaft on an automatic Camaro and you still have to daily drive that car Monday through Friday to go to work and you're stuck in traffic, you're not gonna like it. I will put a very light cam on the automatics, and if you're gonna go bigger on the manuals, make sure that you know what you're getting into, because when you're reading the camshaft to purchase one, all you're looking at is at the great specs and how much horsepower you can make, and you're reading the reviews and how amazing they are, but how many of these people are actually daily driving these cars? Also remember that if you go bigger camshafts, you also have to upgrade the injectors and the entire fuel system. So it's a slippery slope. Sometimes you want just a little bit more power and everybody tells you, oh, look at this crazy camshaft, it's gonna sound amazing, it's gonna be chopping, and then you notice they need to get springs, you need to get fuel injectors, you need to get a fuel pump, and suddenly it turns into a much bigger project. It's great if you know what you're getting into, but I've noticed that a lot of people don't know what they're getting into, and then before they know it, their car is parked and their project that's supposed to be 2 weeks turns into 2 months, and in some cases, 2 years. Very careful with slippery slope. It's addictive, but you have to know what you get into. That's all I gotta say. On to the next one. Now, if you did these simple mods, the car already has difficulty launching because there's no traction. So you need a quality set of tires to really hook up. Otherwise, it's not bueno. But when you do put stickier tires, the first thing that's gonna go is the rear end. Let's just say the engine is too powerful for it. So the very next upgrade will be an upgraded rear end. Now, if you're gonna upgrade the rear end, you can get it with the gears already installed. And the best gears are 373 gears for the 6 speeds. Now, you can go 410s because you have a 6-speed and your gas mileage is not going to take such a massive hit as if it were a 5-speed. However, the traction is already going to be a serious issue with 373s, with the LT1s and the LSs. So 373s are a sweet spot. I've seen people put 410s and they actually go back down to 373s or 355s just because the traction becomes a real issue as you start building up your engine. So keep that in mind, how much horsepower you want to have. If you're going to keep it relatively stock, 373s are good. If you're going turbo, traction is going to be a huge issue. Going 410s might not be the best idea on a 6-speed. On to the next one. Now let's get on to some of the real mods that make a real difference as far as day-to-day. And I'm not talking about just speed, I'm talking about reliability. The number one thing should be a lower temp thermostat, especially on the LT1 cars. You see, the LT1 cars, they're almost running at 230, 220 degrees. So on a hot day, after spanking it a little bit, the temperature is going to shoot straight up into the red zone, at least here in the Miami heat. And it doesn't just happen on the Camaros, it also happens in the Corvettes. The LT1 Corvettes, they run hot, and it's got everything to do with this thermostat. By putting a 160-degree thermostat, it makes a massive difference as far as your day-to-day driving temps. It makes the engine a lot more reliable, a lot happier, and it reduces your stress, so you can enjoy the car a lot more. Now, one thing that I will not do on the LS1 cars and on the LT1 cars is put a set of pulleys, just because of that reason. It slows down the water pump, and you don't want to have overheating issues with these cars. The packaging is just too tight. People don't realize that by also slowing down not just the water pump, but by slowing down the alternator, guess what else is running off of the alternator? The front electric fans. And so when you put pulleys, the front fans also take a hit, especially when they're needed the most. So if it were my personal car, I would skip pulleys for the very same reason that I'm putting the 160-degree thermostat in there. On to the next one. Now, one of the most important upgrades that you could do to any F-body Camaro is the suspension. Now, it's really interesting because I've heard people say that this car is not stiff. This goes contrary to what this car actually is. It's really stiff. As a matter of fact, when this car was engineered, one of the main things that they wanted to address was the chassis stiffness over the earlier models. And how did they test this? This is really interesting because I saw this test on the Firebird, but it applies to the Camaro because it's the same chassis. They're built on the same plant, it's the same everything. This is before it came out. The engineers took these cars out and beat them for 200,000 miles and then took them apart to look for stress cracks. And after 200,000 miles, there was nothing. The body, the structure of the car was virtually brand new. This was completely different than what it was before, that you will get stress cracks. Let's just put it this way, significant cracks after 100,000 miles. That's why it was so important to stiffen up the earlier cars with suffering connectors. The newer cars don't suffer from that. What they do suffer from, especially as the miles pile on, are clapped out suspensions. This means that they're hard and floaty and they are a mess. When you're driving it, it's going to give you the impression that the structure is weak, that the car feels horrible, that it's the car's fault. It's not. Believe me, it's not. The structure is sound, is solid. I've been in these cars with 350,000 miles with new suspension and they drive drum tight. And this is the way that it should drive, drum tight. Every single time I hear somebody say, oh, that this car's got a lot of squeaks and rattles, I'm like, from where? It's usually from suspension that is sending out clanks throughout the entire body and the entire structure is resonating from it. But it's not because of the car, it's because the suspension is a wear item. So I hear a lot of people say, what suspension should be the best? What shocks should be the best? Well, let me put it to you this way. If you have 100,000 miles and you're looking to upgrade to what came from the factory. Make your car drive like it has 0 miles on it by putting in brand new factory shocks, bushings, and springs. It's gonna drive like a completely different car, especially if you have an SS models. Those cars are highly tuned, they're actually smoother but firmer. I will not lower this car. This car already has trouble with speed bumps. I mean, you're gonna lower it even more? If you need to put suffering connectors, the suffering connectors actually stick down a little bit in this car. You might have even bigger clearance issues if you decide to lower it. So unless you're going with air suspension, leaving it at factory height is the best option if you want to be happy mile after mile. I'm not talking about taking a cool Instagram picture, the car looks amazing and look how it looks, you know, flexing or with this stance. No, forget that. That's a picture. I'm talking about you get in the morning, you drive it, and you come back with a smile on your face. Factory ride height is the best if you want to really enjoy your car mile after mile. Today, this is a car that you buy because you love it, not necessarily because you're gonna go out there and dominate the streets. If you're shopping around, you're gonna realize that value is important. I know a lot of people say that, no, it's not that important. You know, the value is in the fun that you have in it. Yes, that's true. Yes, of course, it is definitely true. However, we live here in a world where if you've got something and you need to flip it fast or you want to pass it down to somebody, this is one of the few cars that you can actually buy, enjoy for a couple years, and then sell it for the same or more. This is the standard of this car. So for me, buying the nicest car possible is a must, just because so many of these cars were on the streets and they were neglected. People just took them for granted. They didn't know what they had. I hear of so many people that they had a Z28 Camaro, they sold it, and now they can't find one just as nice. This is what's happening because a lot of these cars have gone from dealer to dealer, from dealer to dealer, from owner to owner, from owner to owner. I mean, a lot of years have passed. This is like a full-blown classic now, and the nice ones are getting harder and harder to find. But when you do find it, if you can keep it in that pristine condition, you can enjoy it for years. These cars are meant to drive 300,000-400,000 miles. You can enjoy it and sell it for the same or more. To me, that adds to the fun. I mean, maybe it's just the way that I'm wired. I don't know. I will admit that I'm one of the ones that has sold Camaros that I wish I had back. Virtually every single Camaro that I've had, I wish I had back. And you can't go back and just find that car. So if you find one, make sure that you keep it. It is totally worth it.